Hi, this is Rabbi Tzvi Mandel of Congregation B'nai Yisrael, community of Jewish friends, and it's great to be here tonight on a Tuesday night. Gimel, Yom Gimel Pashas Bai, and the 6th day of Shvat. And in the year Tavshin Lametes, which is 38 years ago, 36 years ago, passed away, a great tzaddik passed away, a Chassidishe Rebbe by the name of Rav HaKadosh Reb David Yitzchak Isaac ben Rav HaKadosh Reb Baruch Pinchas Teskalya Rebbe Zechanachem. Very, very special, great tzaddik, who in many ways was like the Rebbes that you find from 100 years ago or more. He was a man that was immersed in studying day and night, almost straight, learning full days and full nights, in other words, and he was a great Gaon and great scholar in his learning and a very righteous tzaddik. My grandfather, Shalom, Reb Matchi Yeshua ben Reb Gavriel, was a close chassid of his, and also gave a class in his shul, in his synagogue, in Aruch HaKodesh in Klayaka, and then other things he taught there. This great tzaddik, I'll tell you one thing about him, an interesting story that a friend of mine told me, that he said about himself, that he gave over about himself. He told over this story. So when he first came to America, what does one do? Left everything familiar to him back in Europe, and he had multitudes of Chassidim, and he comes here to America. So he moved to the Lower East Side of Manhattan. What did he do for Parnassa? So he was a beautiful Baal Tefillah. He was a beautiful chazan or cantor leading the services. And he got a position for the high holy days to lead the services in a certain synagogue on Lower East Side of Manhattan. And they gave him a motel room. He took the few belongings that he had, which included writings of his Zaydis and his ancestors from generations back, and maybe to the Baal Shem Tov. He was a grandson of the Holy Baal Shem Tov. And plus other things, and articles of Judaica that were handed down in generations. And he had this all with his possessions when he went into this hotel room. And comes Rosh Hashanah, and he does a beautiful service in the synagogue that hired him, and then he comes back for the break, knocked out, and he sees everything was stolen from him. Everything. There was nothing left there. And here he is with his wife, the Rebbetzin, and he's really so broken and so destitute. He felt like, just crushed. And he's going back and forth, and maybe I shouldn't even go back anymore, and just broken, so broken. But he says to himself, true, to be so broken, to be so ba'atzvistic, to be so depressed, to be so falling apart, it's not right. And especially a Chassidishe and a grandson of the Baal Shem Tov. No, it's wrong. So he strengthened himself so that this is what he told over years later, that he davened a most beautiful davening. And his rendering services, his broken heart, but his chizuk and his strength of his simcha and joy in Hashem, and knowing how much Hashem loves us and takes care of us, and whatever is done to us is only for a good reason. This gave him so much strength that he said it was like, maybe he said it was the most beautiful davening he ever had in his life, or till then, something to that effect. Anyways, he was very great, and all the biggest leaders of the generation, even the non-Chassidic ones, Baron Kotler and Moshe Feinstein, held of him very much because of his great scholarship and his, not only scholarship, but he was immersed in studying day and night. So today was his yahrzeit, yeah. We shall continue. We're studying the Kitzer Shulchan Aruch, Laws of Tzitzis. We're up to chapter 9, paragraph 9, and there's an introduction to this chapter. It goes as follows. The Torah writes regarding the Tzitzis, or Isamai, so you should see it. That's in Bamidbar, chapter 15, verse 39. It is learned from here, sages derived from here, in other words, that there is no obligation to tie tzitzis upon a night garment, since one cannot see the tzitzis in darkness. Maimonides, Rambam in Hilchos Tzitzis, chapter 3, paragraph 7, understands this to mean that no garments require tzitzis when worn at night. The Rosh, another early commentary from the Rishonim, the Rosh in Laws of Tzitzis 1, however, holds that the verse excludes only garments that are designated to be worn at night, for example, like pajamas. Such garments do not need tzitzis, even if they're worn by day. However, daytime garments do require tzitzis, even when worn at night. In any case, one is obligated only according to one of these opinions, since it's a doubt what to do. Thus, in such cases, what it says over here is as follows. In all cases in which one is obligated only according to one of these opinions are treated as cases of doubt. Thus, in such cases, one may not wear the garment without tzitzis, but a blessing is not recited. This paragraph discusses the applications of the above halachas. Okay. A blessing is recited on tzitzis only when they are put on during the day, and not when they are put on at night, as explained above. Ideally, one should take the precaution not to recite a blessing on tzitzis until it is far into the day, that one can discern by the light of the day the difference between tchelis and white. Now, we spoke about tchelis a number of times. Tchelis is the bluish dye obtained from a creature called the chilazon, with which one of the strings of the tzitzis was dyed. We spoke about this before. We'll go through a quick explanation of what tchelis is. Here it is. The biblical mitzvah of tzitzis dictates that one or two of the strings be tchelis, wool dyed a bluish color with a dye made from the secretion of a sea creature called the chilazon. Today, as the identity of the chilazon is not known to us, our tzitzis consist of only white threads. In recent times, we spoke about this also. Several possible identifications of the chilazon have been suggested by some authorities. They therefore maintain that tchelis produced from these newly discovered dyes should be worn. For a comprehensive discussion of the various positions, see the appendix to Volume 2 of the Schottenstein edition of Tractate Menachos. There's the view of the great Radzina Rebbe, Gashen Henach, and then there's the view of the chief rabbi of Israel, Rabbi Herzog, and they have two different kinds of tchelis, and those who adhere to these two great people wear tchelis. There are many Breslovers that wear tchelis because the rabbi, the Rav of Uman, I believe, was a Radzina, and the Breslover in his writings writes that before Mashiach comes, there'll be a great new mitzvah that hasn't been performed for hundreds of years, And some interpret this to mean the tchelis among the breasts of Chassidus. Okay, we will go further. In other words, if one would have tchelis strings in his tzitzis, he would be able to see which strings are tchelis and which are white. Right. Okay. Shulchan 18:3. The verse "and you shall see it" indicates that the requirement of tzitzis applies when one can properly see the tzitzis. This is from the Mordche, brought down by Yosef in Simon 18, chapter 18. Okay, we'll go further. One who donned the talis cotton, the small tzitzis garment, while it was still night, and consequently did not yet recite the blessing over it as above, or he donned it while his hands were not yet clean, and therefore he did not recite the blessing over it. Then, later, when he recites the blessing over the talis gadol, over the large talis by the services, if one begins to pray when it is still too early to recite the blessing over the talis, he may recite it if the time has come between Yishtabach and the Kaddish following it. See Mishnah Berurah 8940 and Rav Feinstein in Igros Moshe Aruch 6, number 7. Okay, he should have in mind while reciting that blessing to include the talis cotton, the small talis as well. Now, the Mishnah Berurah in 8:24 notes that it has become the custom that the blessing made over the talis gadol, the large talis, exempts the small talis, the talis cotton as well, and therefore a separate blessing is not recited when one puts on both a talis gadol and a talis cotton. See Igros Moshe Aruch 5:20-25. Okay, so you can include the talis cotton in that blessing as well. Regarding one who does not have a talis gadol, someone who doesn't have a big talis, or an unmarried person, or a boy who does not wear a talis according to the most Ashkenazic customs, if he dons the talis cotton by day and his hands are clean at the time, he should recite upon this mitzvah the following blessing: Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher kishel mitzvahs al mitzvahs tzitzis. Blessed are you, Hashem, our King, King of the universe, who has sanctified us with his commandments and has commanded us regarding the mitzvah of tzitzis. The vav with the patach, mitzvahs, noting the singular form. One who, while putting the small talis, the talis cotton, mistakenly recited the blessing of the large talis, the talis gadol, need not recite the blessing of al mitzvah tzitzis. Doesn't have to worry about it. This is in Mishnah Berurah 8:17. If he dons the talis cotton, the small talis, at a time when he cannot recite the blessing on it, in other words, if it is still night or his hands are not clean, then in that case, afterward, when it's day and his hands are clean, he should take the strings of the tzitzis in his hands and recite the blessing of al mitzvah tzitzis. One who slept through the night while wearing his talis cotton should not recite the blessing on this talis cotton afterwards at all, as long as he is still wearing it. This is because, according to the opinion that only a night garment is exempt from tzitzis, one who slept with his talis cotton has been fulfilling the mitzvah throughout the night, and therefore there is no reason to recite a new blessing in the morning. See Mishnah Berurah 8:42. Okay, that was because we had the Rambam in the Rush, whether at night there is any mitzvah of wearing tzitzis or not. So that's according to that view. Okay. However, if later he puts on a talis gadol, a large talis, when he recites the blessing on his talis gadol, he should have in mind for this blessing to discharge his possible obligation to recite a blessing over the talis cotton, the small one as well. Let's just see if there's anything added by the Rav Shulchan Aruch. That was 9:9. He said in the beginning of this paragraph that we don't make a bracha on the tzitzis at night. You don't make it by day. According to Shulchan Aruch, from when the Amud HaShachar comes up until Tzeis HaKachavim, we spoke about the Amud HaShachar, the earlier time, there were 2 times, until Tzeis HaKachavim, until the stars come out at night. However, in the Siddur, the Rav says that after the beginning of Shkia, of sundown, it's prohibited to make the blessing. Usually we paskin like the Shulchan Aruch and not according to the Siddur. But it's probably best not to make the blessing after the beginning of sundown anyway. Okay, number 10. The blessing that one recites upon a mitzvah remains in effect until the fulfillment of the mitzvah is interrupted. When it is interrupted, a new blessing must be recited upon beginning the mitzvah again. This paragraph discusses which events constitute an interruption with regard to the wearing of a talis. One who takes off his talis with the intention to put it back on right away, even if in the meantime he had gone into the bathroom, when he puts it back on, he does not recite another blessing again. The reason for this is, since technically the halacha is that one is allowed to go with his talis into the bathroom. According to the halacha, it's permitted to bring a talis into the bathroom. However, it is proper to avoid doing this out of respect for a garment worn for prayer. Talking about the talis gadol, the large talis now. So we don't bring it into the bathroom, even though technically we're allowed to. Therefore, going to the bathroom is not considered an interruption in the mitzvah, since technically he would be allowed to do it. However, if, when taking off the talis, he did not intend to put it back on right away, and he then changed his mind and put it back on, he must recite the blessing anew upon donning it again. Okay, now it's as follows. Removing the talis with the intention not to put it back on right away constitute an interruption in the performance of the mitzvah and mandates the recitation of another blessing. If he took the talis off with no specific intention in mind, then the law depends on whether he was wearing a talis cotton at the time, whether he was wearing the small one at the time. If he was wearing the small one at the time, he does not need to recite the blessing again upon donning the large talis, the talis gadol again. But if he was not wearing a talis cotton, the small one, he must recite the blessing again when he dons the talis again. This is according to the Mishnah Berurah 8:38. Mishnah Berurah adds that one who removes his talis in the middle of prayers, even without any specific intention, is considered as one who planned to put it back on again right away. So he wouldn't have to make a blessing, in other words. We'll continue. If one's talis inadvertently slipped off, the law is as follows. If part of the talis remained on his body, even though most of the talis had fallen off, since part of the mitzvah still remained upon him, he need not recite the blessing again. He doesn't have to say it again when straightening it upon his body. But if no part of the talis remained on his body, even if he still held onto the talis in his hand, but it's not in his body, since no part of the mitzvah remained on his body, as the fact that he is holding it in his hand is not considered to be remaining with part of the mitzvah, since the mitzvah is not for one to hold the talis in his hand, it's a mitzvah to wear it, but rather to wrap one's body with it. Therefore, since he is now totally bereft of the mitzvah, he must recite a new blessing when he puts it back on. Although, according to many authorities, when one removes the talis gadol, the large talis, he does not recite another blessing upon putting it back on, as long as He's wearing a talis cotton, the small one at the time. In the case that it accidentally fell off, he's required to recite another blessing, even in this instance. Mishnah Berurah 8:39. Okay, if this happened to him in the middle of the prayers, when he is at a point which he is not permitted to interrupt his prayers by reciting the blessing of the talis, in other words, in the middle of Shemona Esrei, he should put on the talis immediately, but not recite the blessing then. Rather, he should wait until a point in the prayers at which he is allowed to recite the blessing, take the tzitzis strings in his hand, and recite the blessing. Okay, 11. Let's see if the Rav says anything different. That was 10. Chapter 9, paragraph 10. Now, it's said in the Kitzer that someone who had in mind not to put it on right away, so the Rav Shulchan is, or if he forgot, and for some reason didn't put it on until after many hours, then he has to make a bracha. Does have to make a new blessing. Even if the talis cotton, even if he's wearing a talis cotton, a small talis, and even if he didn't go out of his house altogether in between. Now, if he took off his talis without having anything in mind, whether he was going to put it back on, whether he wasn't going to, so if a little bit of the talis cotton, so then even if the talis cotton, the small talis is on him, he doesn't have to make a bracha again. But if it isn't on him, then he does have to make a bracha again. Okay. We shall go further. We're up to 11. There is no mitzvah for a person to tie tzitzis onto a garment that does not belong to him. In other words, like this. There's the tractate Chulin 136a. However, when a person borrows a garment for more than 30 days, there is a rabbinic commandment to affix tzitzis to it, so that it should not appear as if he is wearing his own garment without tzitzis. It's like a marasayan. Some things we do to be clean in the eyes of people as well. We're not flattering people. We don't have a religion that has to be good according to people, but there is such a thing as being being pure in the eyes of God, in the eyes of Israel. This is in Shulchan 14:3. So, however, when a person borrows a talis, which is usually worn for the specific purpose of fulfilling the mitzvah of tzitzis, there is an assumption that it is given to him in a manner that enables him to recite a blessing and fulfill his obligation. We therefore assume that the owner of the talis gives it to him as a present for the duration of the time that he wears it, so that it is his and he may recite a bracha on it when he puts it on. Mishnah Berurah 14:11. Mishnah Berurah there adds that it is preferable for the borrower to ask the owner explicitly to give the talis to him as a present, to avoid having to rely on this assumption. So he gives it to him as a present, as a matana, and that makes it as if it's his, at least it's temporarily his, and that way he can make a blessing. Okay, this sif that we're going to study, this paragraph, discusses the cases of one who borrows a talis without the owner's knowledge, and one who borrows a talis not for the purpose of fulfilling the mitzvah of tzitzis, but to wear as a sign of respect for the congregation. Okay. It is permitted for a person to take the talis of another person on occasion, even without his knowledge, to pray with it, and to recite the blessing upon wearing it. Walks into a synagogue, he forgot his talis at home, the large talis, he may take someone else's. Although, ordinarily, one may not borrow another's items without his express permission. Here it's permitted, because it can be assumed that is, a person is pleased to have a mitzvah performed with his possessions. The person is not an angry person. The person usually is not someone who's makbid, who's very, minds about everything that he owns. On the contrary, he'll be happy that someone's doing a mitzvah with his possession. So part of the mitzvah goes to him, right? He's doing a chesed, he's doing a kindness. This dispensation does not apply to even the occasional use of someone else's books, svarim, as there is a possibility that the user may tear the pages. So we don't say that in that case, but a talus is different. So says the Mishnah Berurah in 1460. Okay. And this is also where there is generally no loss of money involved. What's going to happen? Nothing's going to happen to the talus. If the person is available to ask, one should definitely ask and not take it without asking. This is Mishnah Berurah 1413. According to some authorities, when borrowing talus from another person without his knowledge, it is best to have in mind specifically not to acquire it. So there will certainly be no obligation to recite a blessing. This is in that Mishnah Berurah that we mentioned, 1414. However, he may not take it out of the premises in which it was left. For the owner may take exception to this, and he's not going to be too happy about it, right? If the talus was folded, he must refold it after using it. In the same manner that it was folded originally. Okay. On Shabbos, when it's forbidden to fold garments, which we'll see later on in chapter 80, with Hashem's help, one may borrow the talus, but should not fold it after using it. As since the only reason that he does not fold it is due to the Shabbos prohibition, the owner forgives him for not folding it. Regarding one who borrows the talus from another, only to wear it upon going up to the Torah to receive an aliyah, right? They called him up to the Torah, and he didn't have a talus, so he's borrowing his friends. This applies also to one who is leading the services as a chazan or a kohen, who dons the talus to bestow the berachos kehanim, the priestly blessings. This is in Mishnah Berurah 1411. So any of these cases, there is a doubt whether he should recite the blessing upon donning it. Therefore, the borrower should have in mind when taking it that he does not want to acquire it as his, and then according to all opinions, he needs not to recite the blessing as explained above. However, on a talus that belongs to the congregation, many shuls have a talus specifically for this reason. So even if one takes it only for the purpose of being called to the Torah, he must recite the blessing when donning it. For it is treated like his own personal talus. The communal talus is bought by the congregation with the understanding that it should belong to whoever puts it on. Mishnah Berurah in 1411, however, says that many have the custom not to recite a blessing, even in this case. We will stop here temporarily. In Camp Aguda, they used to say that when I was a kid, a couple of days ago, learning never finishes, but we'll take a temporary break till the next time we learn. Let's meanwhile just see if the Shulchan says anything on what we just studied. That was 11. Now, it started, it's permissible to take a talus that belongs to his friend only on occasion, even without him knowing it, in order to pray with it and to make a bracha on it. And he's let him make a bracha on it, and the Rav Shulchan says, if he wants, he could make a blessing, but it's not, he doesn't have to. Now, someone that borrows a talis from his friend in order to go up, he got an aliyah. So there's a question about whether he makes a bracha or not. Therefore, he should have in mind that he doesn't want to acquire it, and then according to everyone, he doesn't have to make a blessing. However, the Rav Shulchan Aruch writes that if the person that's giving it to him knows that he's borrowing it for the mitzvah of tzitzis, then he may make a bracha on it. If not, he shouldn't, but he may. He may. Okay. Let's just see what the rest of the Paiskim say about this. We did chapter 9. Yes. Right. Tess Yud. Yud Beis. We learned in chapter 10 that if he had in mind not to put on the talis after he took it off, not to put it back on right away, and then he regretted that and did put it on, so he has to make a new bracha. Even if when he took it off, he had in mind to put it on right away, and then he forgot or he regretted it, and he didn't put it on for many hours, so he has to make another blessing. That's how the Rav Shulchan Aruch brings down, and the Beis Yosef. And then in the case of, he said in 11, that it's permitted to take someone else's talis, the large talis in his shul, temporarily, even without his knowledge, to pray in it, and he makes a bracha, because most people don't mind if you do a mitzvah with their talis, where they're not going to lose anything from it. It's not going to get torn. It's not going to get broken. So he makes a bracha, and Maskar Shulchan quotes to say the Hayom that says, "Do not make a bracha on your friend's talis when you take it without his knowledge." But if he borrows it to him in order to pray, and then for sure he holds it shouldn't make a bracha. Okay, let's just see what Rabbi Grun says in his Shalom Tzon Malacha. We're up to, we are 9, we did 10 and 11. Oh, if it fell off by accident, his talis fell off by accident, and it's completely off his body, he's just holding it with his hand. So he has to make another blessing after. Machzah Shekel says that if a talis fell off his body, and he's still wearing a talis cotton, he doesn't have to make a bracha. He's wearing the small talis that everybody wears throughout the day. Mishnah Berurah says that even if talis cotton is still on, he still has to make a bracha. But the Meyoshe and the Bejana Rav, the Tshuvas HaMasham in 4th volume 148, agree with Machzah Shekel, not with the Mishnah Berurah, and say he doesn't have to. We learned about if you take someone else's talis gadol, a large talis in a shul. We say Mistam Nichla Linish, probably a person doesn't mind as long as he doesn't destroy it or lose any money or the worth of it or rip it or anything. You're allowed to borrow someone else's talis in a shul, so the Chuvas Hasham, the B'Shana Rav, in the first volume, chapter 29, quotes the Shaz Chuvas Hareim, that even if the person is standing there and says, don't take it, he still may take it if he wants. Because we say Nichle Linish, because of this rule that if a Jew has an neshama and if he's anything of a Jew, he doesn't mind. But the Stechemet says that, of course, if you can do it against the guy's will, it's prohibited, and that's how most Paiskim say, and that's how the Mishnah says in chapter 14, paragraph 13. Have a great night, people.